Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name, of course, is Sisa or Chris, and today we're talking about Final Fantasy XIV in 2019. Now, it's the big day. We finally arrived at our first dungeon. This is very exciting. I've been waiting to do a dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV for so long, and I'm thrilled to finally be able to talk about it with you guys because, let's be honest, I've been taking a little while to level. I'm a little bit slow, and a lot of people have wanted to see me try out the dungeons, try out the duty finder, and see what it's all about. So here we are. Right before we get into that, though, if you're new to the channel, we are Tiny Blue Games. We are a casual gaming community. We tend to focus on MMORPGs, although there have been other games that we've played in the past. And most recently, we've been focused on Final Fantasy XIV, MapleStory, World of Warcraft, and I think and Guild Wars 2 as well. So we do bounce around a bit. I think that's how you keep gaming exciting. But here we are. Let's get into it. I think the first dungeon, I believe you pronounce it Satasha, took me about 30 minutes to do. I'm actually going to do, once again, a slightly different variation of video here where I show the entire run unedited with my charming voice for 30 whole minutes, and we're going to see how it goes. What it could run into problems of is the video being quite long and some of you dropping out of the video. And I fully get that if you're a veteran player and you've ran this dungeon more than you could ever want to see it. Yeah, I wouldn't be sticking around. I mean, if you are a veteran player, do feel free to leave comments for new players. They always love those comments. But yeah, so that's one issue. The other issue is that I might get rambly. I might run out of things to say. I might just get weird. Who knows? 30 minutes is a long time to talk at this microphone. But the one advantage is I do get to see the actual gameplay footage while I'm talking. That's probably why, if you can hear in the background, my computer's sometimes struggling. It is apparently to play back the footage and record me. I have a gaming laptop, so not great, and B, it's about 5 years, maybe 6 years old now, so definitely in the market for a new computer desktop at some point. So, but yeah, you guys can hear that in the background. It's just, it adds to the experience, the ambiance, if you will. But yeah, let's talk about the dungeon, huh? So the queue finder took about 14 minutes as a DPS. Not too bad, not too bad. World of Warcraft, you can easily be longer than that, especially at a low level. I have no doubts that the other two, the tank and healer, probably got in much quicker. From what it looked like on the side, it showed that the tank spot was filled pretty quickly, but it was the healer that we were waiting for, and I think that's pretty common in the comments. It's actually interesting, though, because I'd say in most MMOs I play, it is the tank that we're often waiting for, not the healer. The healer is by far more in need than DPS, but definitely the tank. So we'll see how that plays out. This was also a sample size of one run, so I don't actually know what it's like overall. But yeah, we'll see. In terms of who we got going on in here, I'm an archer. There's someone that I want to say is a samurai, and I'd say that's the other DPS. And I feel like he's probably not a samurai because that's a job. But he's got what looks like a samurai weapon. We've got someone who's got kind of a axe, maybe. And then we have sort of someone with, I think it's the card deck, but I'm not sure. This is a horrible explanation of the people I'm in the dungeon with. But hey, I'm an archer. I can tell you that. I turned into a bard. Look at me. I'm learning. But there we go. I guess the big change in the room here is that it's a 4-person dungeon, not a 5-person dungeon. And I didn't know that was the case, actually, until I got into the queue finder and I saw we were only looking for 2 DPS. Is that the case for all dungeons? Because that's kind of unique to Final Fantasy XIV. I don't know how it would play out. I guess it puts more more importance on each of the person's like role during the fight, during the instance, and I think that is often something that, like 5-player dungeons, you probably can have someone who's slacking, right? If we're talking World of Warcraft, or we're talking like a not the most high end, but if we're talking like a heroic dungeon, you can probably have one of the DPS be pretty bad and still do okay. So I think with the two DPS and a tank and a healer, we're at a point here where we need everyone to really be pulling their weight. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, very interesting. And I guess with that, what are the standard sizes for raids at endgame? Is that like 10 players, 20 players, 30 players, or is it something very unique as well? So I'd be interested to know that if someone could put that in the comments below. And also, I guess, if dungeons are always 4 players or not. So thematically, the dungeon looks really cool. It's definitely got sort of a underwater by the sea vibe. As I later discover, because look at that, I've actually already done the dungeon. It's quite piratey, and I mean the actual the quest. Now that I look at it, is called "It's Probably Pirates," so I could have probably guessed that it was probably pirates. But yeah, it's an interesting dungeon, a large variety of different sort of sea life and actual physical creatures, which I think is nice. I think it's boring if you have a dungeon that's all people, like all actual humanoids. That gets pretty repetitive, and it tends to be the case for low-level dungeons, is that you have just all humanoids walking around, and you're just always fighting the same kind of person. So I'm pretty glad that's not the case here. We do have a mix of sea life, some clams as you're seeing here, so that's pretty cool. As a DPSer, one of the big things, and I actually had read a comment about this in my videos, was that I need to make sure I give the tank enough time to actually pull and get aggro. And this is something I probably struggled with the most as a DPSer in this dungeon. Both me and the healer would get targeted by one of the creatures. For myself, I started giving a fair bit more time and making sure that I was using my main attacks on the same monster that the tank was taking. A big way that I was able to ensure this was just sort of waiting and seeing which target he was targeting. Let him do, an AoE or something like that on everyone before I start spreading. Because what I've been doing for DPS is I've been spreading my poison, and I'm super sorry, I don't know the actual skill name off the top of my head, but my number 4 on my action keys there, my poison, I would apply it to as many monsters as I could usually, and then I'd start focusing single target abilities. And I have no idea if that's a wrong strategy or not, but because of that, I would have to wait a couple, seconds for the tank to get aggro, and then, hey, after that, let's jump into it. But yeah, otherwise, I don't think we ran into too much difficulty. The end of the dungeon, we did have sort of a situation where it looked like the tank was DCing, and I was kind of like waiting, and then all of a sudden, like we were in the boss room, and I pulled an extra group. We'll see it at the end there and see if I'm the idiot or not. I should have actually mentioned, and you might have seen this in the video, at the start of the dungeon, the first thing I did was say, hey, I'm new here, let me know if I'm being stupid. And I think that's such an important attitude to have if you are a new player, because so often people are very scared, right, to make themselves look like a fool. And if they do, they end up getting very angry and looking like, someone that no one wants to be friends with. And I think that's the biggest way that we kind of push people out of a new MMO, is by not accepting that someone's not going to know all the mechanics off the top of their head, and then getting antagonistic about it. So it's definitely on the new player as well to kind of say, hey, I'm new. So that's what I did. And then I think it was the tank that said hello with a smiley face, and we just got into it. There was never actually a time where mechanics had to be explained to me in this dungeon. The only fight that I actually super focused on mechanics was the last fight, and we'll obviously talk about that more when we do get there. But overall, I didn't see ton of things. The clams that you see me fighting right now are pretty interesting, where they would sort of spawn out little fiery creatures, but you had to kill the actual clam so that they stopped spawning. So that was kind of a more interesting trash mob. But once you figured out that you needed to attack the clam, it wasn't that bad. Now, from what I've seen, I think the tank has been into this dungeon before, because they definitely knew how to activate the bosses. They kind of knew where they were going. In terms of like looking at the map, you can kind of figure out where you're going, but I definitely am glad I chose the DPS first, just to sort of see which way I should go if I do end up tanking one day. And I do fully expect that I'm going to try many of the different roles, but I definitely want to go through the dungeons each as a DPS or even as a healer and see where I need to go. Now, the one thing I did notice is that it's pretty easy to see where a boss is going to spawn, because you kind of initiate it and then you have a few seconds before this sort of purpley border, as you can see in the background here, cuts off the rest of the area, so that you have sort of a zone that you're fighting the boss in, and that's all you're focused on. I definitely think that's a good mechanic, because it allows you to know where the boss is. It allows you to know what kind of space you have to work with. But it is certainly, it breaks a bit of immersion where you're very aware this is kind of a cage that they set up so you could fight this boss. And it's typical of MMOs to do this, so I'm not saying, hey, bad on Final Fantasy. And like I say, there is positives to it. It's definitely like, I know what it's here for. I'm not fooled into thinking it's some sort of aesthetic piece of the dungeon. I know it's a mechanic here that's sort of containing the fight. I guess this gets into a good idea, a good place for us to talk about loot. So there's loot rules. There's need, greed, and pass. Very similar to World of Warcraft, which is great. I hadn't even considered loot before I got to this point. What it seems like is that everyone still has to like actually open the chest, and everyone has like kind of a roll, an RNG roll for a piece of loot to come out of the chest, and then everyone in the group is then doing need, greed, or pass on it. And I actually end up passing on a few things I don't need, but more than I thought of it, I guess like if you don't need the item, you probably just greed it, like unless you physically don't need the gil, you don't need the item in any way, you could pass it. And is there a bigger percentage of people that are kind of, I don't want to say dicks, but are kind of like not great with loot because of the multi-class system? Like when I think about it, in WoW, on my priest, I have very little incentive apart from the like, disenchanting it or something to take a sword. In this game, a sword comes up and I'm like, yes, I don't use that on my archer, but I could main a different class on this exact same person and use that sword. So is it a bigger issue in this game than other games to sort of need on things you don't actually need? Or I guess I didn't even try needing on it. It might prevent you from needing if like, I'll try and look when it comes up next time, since I'm watching with you guys. Can you stop and actually like not need the item? Like, does the game prevent you from needing it if you're not the proper class for it? Because I would assume, I guess that's what it would do. But yeah, very, very interesting system, and very traditional as well. So I'm glad that it was something I was familiar with. This is kind of another boss fight we have right here with 3 monsters instead of the one. I definitely find it a lot easier fighting a singular monster on my archer. I feel like I'm a lot more set up to just do single target damage. I'm not as concerned about getting aggro on one of the ads and sort of having to kite it around, which, granted, I didn't mind kiting it around, but here we go. Yeah, so I can't actually need on this, can I? This is the sword I'm talking about. So the need's grayed out, so I'm guessing that's how they prevent this from being an issue, since it would be a bigger issue, I think, in this game. So yeah, it's actually, okay, it's grayed out. Which makes sense then, so anything that I can actually need, I should assume that is probably usable by my class. And that, as a beginner, that makes it a lot easier for me to understand what's good for me, what's bad for me, and what I can actually use. Because I was actually concerned that I was going to roll on something that I didn't need and look like a fool. Because that's one of the easiest ways to make a group angry with you. And yeah, so I'm glad that didn't come up. In terms of experience, actually, these dungeons are super good. Like, I was certainly level 16 when I started this, and just the experience you get from the mobs themselves, very impressive. I'd say that was actually more impressive to me than the experience of completing the dungeon. That was more on the same level as completing a quest. So it was actually, I would almost say, kind of lackluster because of that. But certainly the XP from each mob is what definitely adds up and lets you level real quick. Now, I think I have rest XP as well because I have sort of, or had a secondary lighter bar below it. And I actually don't know how the rest XP system works in this game. I believe if I'm in a sanctuary area, I probably get it. That's kind of how I've been treating it. Kind of like, if you're in an inn in WoW, you're going to have rest XP. If there are more details to it that you guys want to share, you know where the comments are. I love your knowledge. But that's definitely how I've been treating it. And I'm super sorry if I've been doing a lot of well, I'm just really trying to get a scope of a 30-minute recording and work with it. So I do apologize for that, and I know I've also been said that I apologize too much in my videos. So there's no real happy medium, or I guess that's what I'm trying to find, is the happy medium. I do have a little cup of water though, so there's that. There you go. I prepared for the 30-minute video, don't worry. And you guys can let me know in the comments if 30 minutes is just too long and you'd like me to chop this down. I fully get it. I mean, some people who are actually just watching this to see the layout of the dungeon, yeah, this might be great for them. But certainly the people who are just here to enjoy Final Fantasy content, 30 minutes gets to be a little bit. So yeah, here we're getting to kind of a key system. And I picked up one of the keys, and I was super terrified because I was like, oh god, do I have to do something special with this key? But then I saw the doors right away, and I was like, oh, they're clickable. And as it turns out, I think more than one person can pick up the key, which is good, because you're definitely, at low level new player dungeons, going to have people that pick up something and don't know how to use it. So very smart of Final Fantasy to make it so that multiple people have a key, and it's not just one person that has to figure out what they're doing. I definitely appreciate that. Definitely a big help. But you can see me here. I'm trying to help unlock it. I don't actually do it. It's crazy, the interrupt thing. It makes it so big and bold that you've been interrupted, which is good because I guess there are games where I'm did my skill cast or not? This one, it's pretty clear if you got interrupted. It says it pretty big in your face. So that was something to get used to as well. But yeah, I don't know. Is there a large variety of dungeons? I believe from what I've been reading, a lot of people who are healers and tanks will actually just do dungeons that are duty finder the entire way to max level. And is there enough dungeon variety that you're gonna be interested doing that, or do you end up doing a lot of the same dungeon over and over in this game? Because I feel like that's definitely something that if you're gonna level that way, it can get pretty boring if you're always doing the same dungeon over and over and over again. So it would be interesting to know. I'm sure I'll find some more dungeons on the way to level 35. I'd be surprised if this is the only one. And I actually didn't know that this was the first dungeon. I thought, and I might be completely wrong with what this is, that the Hall of Novice was the first dungeon. And I don't even because it's listed below the duty finder. So is it not even a dungeon? Was I super confused about that? What is the Hall of Novice? I would love to know. Yeah, so if you could mention that would be cool too. Because I definitely thought the Hall of Novice was going to be a first dungeon and work very much like the Protostar Academy if you ever played WildStar, which some of you are probably laughing at me for bringing up WildStar. I'm crying because it's dead. But Wildstar had the Protostar Academy as its first dungeon, and this was a dungeon that like legitimately like made fun of the mechanics of the game and sort of showed you how to do it. So like they had things called break bars, which was like enough people had to interrupt at the same time to actually interrupt a skill. So there would be like a boss that's like entire purpose was to teach people about interrupts, and if they didn't figure out how to interrupt it, they would die. Like otherwise the boss was nothing except to make sure you could interrupt. And then there would be one about like getting into helpful telegraphs versus running away from bad telegraphs. And there was a bunch of stuff like that. It was a pretty boring dungeon once you knew how to play the game, but like you would come out of it knowing the core mechanics of the game, and you would be able to go on from there and do completely fine in a regular dungeon, which their regular dungeons were actually pretty difficult. So I guess I see that it was a kind of required step. This, as a regular dungeon, I wouldn't say it was ever difficult. You'll see at the end here that we have some difficulties caused by a certain archer pulling a group right before the final boss, but otherwise we didn't have too much difficulty. So I don't know. Like this, it's definitely fine. Even as someone who doesn't at all know how to do dungeons, doesn't at all know really how archers play, I didn't feel like I was hindering the group ever. But I didn't super know how well I was doing, and that kind of gets me to another point here. And I feel like I'm just going on about random stuff, but is there no DPS meters in the game? I don't. Is there add-ons? I guess. Like, is that a thing in Final Fantasy 14? Can I see how much damage I'm doing? Can I see how much damage I'm doing compared to other damage dealers? I know it's a really sensitive topic in a lot of games, where World of Warcraft has like full on like do whatever you want add-ons, whereas Guild Wars 2, people kind of like are very secretive, and there's like a behind the scenes community that make add-ons that tell DPS that were kind of illegal for a while, but now are kind of like legal, but you still have to get them in pretty sketchy ways. So where does Final Fantasy 14 fit between there? Because it's not a deal breaker, but certainly I don't think I would play a DPS character as my main without being able to see how much damage I was doing and how much I'd improved. Like, I just don't understand. Like, I guess, yes, you can see how much your actual shots are doing and stuff like that, but there's got to be a way to make sure your rotation is like proper and stuff like that. So let me know how that works in this game. I'm very curious. It's certainly one of the bigger parts of MMOs for me, and I don't know if that makes me feel like some sort of elitist scum or something like that, but I'd like to be able to see my improvement, and see it as an actual number as opposed to just like the gear getting better, because you can have really good gear and not know how to play your class at all, and it's really gonna like throw you for a loop. So this guy's a marauder, if you were wondering. He is a marauder. So I actually got curious about who was playing what, because I was like, is this guy a dragoon? And I wasn't really sure. And I'm still not sure if marauder turns into dragoon or if this is what a warrior is. And I know so many people have explained the classes, so you don't even have to mention it in the comments, because I can just go look at another comment. But I was confused. But yeah, so sorry, I got off topic there. It would be interesting to know if there was a DPS meter, and if there is, can I activate it at lower levels, or is it just an endgame thing? And on the topic of how well you perform in dungeons, one thing that I was really excited to see was that at the very end you kind of get to write a review for each of the players. And I think this is a really good system because it kind of like it should help people be nicer in dungeons, right? It should prevent people from being mean, from being like just very toxic to other players, because if that's the case and you don't want to actually kick the person, you can still at least, leave them a review that wasn't too flattering. However, when I did get to the end of the dungeon, and you'll see that very momentarily, I had an issue where everyone left the dungeon before I got to write the review. And I assume no one wrote the review for me, so I don't know, is it just a system that no one actually really uses? Or is it more of a pre-made sort of system? Like if you're in a group of friends, you're going to use it so that they can get rewards. because yeah, it seemed like you could get rewards, and I was like, why would you not want to do that? But yeah, I don't know. Oh, this is okay. So this is the weird thing. I thought our tank DC'd, so I went and chilled on that rock, and I was watching the cutscene because I'm new. So I was like, oh, let's see this, and terrifying monster to begin with. But I spawn here, right? And I'm like, where is everybody? Like, I'm just on my rock still. And I'm like, okay, I'll come find you guys. But I'm like, I have to go through these 3 people. And I feel like I did something real bad because I did that. And then this guy pulled the boss. And it was not a good situation. Spoilers, we do end up recovering from this. But the tank for sure dies at least once. It's not great. I try to use my self heal. The healer's really the hero here, right? Like you got to give it to the healer for pulling this together. I don't know, like, 'cause I think the tank dies, and I don't. Can you battle res someone in this game? Is that a word that you guys like? Can you res someone in combat, or like is he able to run back once he dies? Like, how does that work? I actually didn't die, and weird flex. I know I didn't die in my first dungeon. But I have no idea how the death works in it because of that, and I'm kind of scared. But are you able to actually just run back, or do you have to wait until you're out of combat? How did this guy get back up? So he's dead right now. He's dead, and he's gonna come back up. And I'm just kind of seeing if someone like actually cast something, or yeah. So he's back, and I don't know if anyone actually cast anything to do that. So did he get battle res? Did he run in? I'm curious. Oh, and also look at my sweet kite skills here. I'm just like kiting circles around this guy. He doesn't even know. He doesn't even know. But yeah, these guys didn't even get upset about this. I feel like they kind of chalked this one off to he's a new player, so whatever. Oh, and you'll also watch me not really pay attention for the first mechanic in this too, which is rough because I made my healer do it, who was like struggling to heal the tank after our near wipe. But I notice what happens here, and I notice the monster coming up after the bubbles. So I put the mechanic together, and that's actually another really good thing. Like if I'm able to just see with my eyes what a mechanic does in a game, that's so much better than a mechanic where like you die and you're like, what happened to us? What should I do differently, right? So I like I'm watching this guy. I'm like, oh, it's bubbling over there. Should I go help it? He has it, and I was like, oh crap, this one still did it too. So it's at this point that I realize that all 4 of them are gonna do it at the same time. And the very next time, you'll be proud of me. I get the hatch all by myself, and I almost run to another one. So, you know, not to brag, but I did pretty good, pretty good. But yeah, like knowing what mechanics do just by visually seeing them is such a good design, because there's a lot of WoW dungeons and raids that come out like the new ones these days, where I'm confused by what's happening during the boss fight. And I don't know what I could do better next time. I don't know what I should work on. So the actual ability to understand what's happening, what do I need to do better next time, is such a important thing to make a visual experience. Because that's how people like me, even without talking to the group and being like, hey guys, what did I do bad here? I'm able to improve it each and every time. And luckily we didn't wipe and we didn't have to restart. But if that was the case, the next time we pulled, I would be fully ready to get to it. And I'm sure they would have explained probably that I needed some help. So who knows? But yeah, guys, that's the first dungeon. That's it. 30 minutes. Can't believe I talked for that long. If you listened for that long, you deserve a medal as well. But yeah, if you liked the video, please give it a like. Please leave your comments below. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.